Amazingly enough, these are our last 3 works, and this is your last regular lecture podcast. The disembodied voice won't shut up just yet. You still have a test review podcast for this unit and some course review podcasts. And then I show up in person for our final reviews. Still, this is a big deal. We've almost made it. These last 3 artists and their works have certain elements in common. What are they? Well, the artists are all of African descent. Yinka Shawnabari was born in London to Nigerian parents, grew up in Nigeria, returned to Britain for art school, and stayed. In 2005, he was named a member of the Order of the British Empire, which I think makes him Sir Yinka Shawnabari, which is a little ironic given the anti-colonial theme of much of his work. Julie Maretu was born in Ethiopia to an Ethiopian father and an American mother, but her family fled to America when she was a child, and she has lived and worked in the United States ever since. Anatsui was born in Ghana, but has lived in Nigeria most of his life, teaching at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. What about common themes? Despite their physical similarity, what content do these works share? Well, I would argue that all 3 works in different ways address globalization. These artists are global citizens whose work is informed both by their African heritage and by a global art world that brings artists from around the world and art patrons from around the world together at various biennale and museum exhibits. Moreover, all 3 artists explore the way cultural and economic exchange has changed people's lives, what's sometimes called hybridity, the way cultures form hybrids by exchanging with each other. So Shawnabari's French aristocrats wear cloth made from Indonesian patterns produced in British and Dutch factories, sold to West African markets, where Dutch wax cloth has become identified as distinctly African. Maretu's abstract stadiums seem to fly flags of many countries and include symbols that suggest global telecommunication and exchange through global corporations. Anatsui's abstract cloths contain Ghanaian kente cloth, but also flattened liquor bottle caps, a one-time European import that has wreaked havoc on many African lives. So while their work implicitly condemns colonialism, it also, perhaps ironically, celebrates the exchange and, again, hybridity that colonialism made possible. So now let's take our last 3 works one by one. Clearly, Shawnabari's work is an homage to Fragonard's, so what's different about these works? No reason not to start with the obvious. Shawnabari's installation is 3-dimensional. It is installed to give us the same view, essentially, as our view of Fragonard's playful lady. That is, we look right up her skirts. But viewers can also walk around Shawnabari's lady and put themselves in the place of one of the other 2 figures missing from the installation. The man pushing the girl in the swing, and the lover hiding in the bushes. Once again, the viewer becomes a participant, maybe even a guilty participant. Think of how our shadows hit Kara Walker's silhouettes. And then there's the cloth. We've already talked about that and the themes of globalization, colonialism, and cultural appropriation that the Dutch wax cloth suggests. But what about the missing heads? Well, it turns out the missing heads are not entirely a shout-out to the French Revolution. When I did more research into this artist, I discovered that lots of Shawnabari's figures are missing heads. Note in this installation that the European statesmen sitting around the table dividing up Africa are also wearing Dutch wax cloth. And by the way, this really happened at the Congress of Berlin in 1884. Next year's AP World History students, stay tuned. Here's a quiz for students who travel to New York with us. Do you recognize the painting that Shawnabari is imitating here? We saw it in the Fragonard room at the Frick. Something else I hadn't picked up on earlier is that Shawnabari is disabled. At the age of 18, he contracted transverse myelitis, an inflammation of the spinal cord that left one side of his body paralyzed. Over time, the disability has become more severe, and he now uses an electric wheelchair. So here's what the artist himself has to say. I do have a physical disability, and I was determined that the scope of my creativity would not be restricted purely by my physicality. It would be like an artist choosing to build only what could be physically built by hand. Instead, Shawnabari relies upon a team of assistants to realize his artistic vision. In a sense, that makes him a truly conceptual artist. So let's watch a short video clip that introduces the artist and more of his work. Here is a description from the Florida Museum where this work now hangs. Anatsui's Old Man's Cloth is inspired in part by Tcloth, the royal and ceremonial strip-woven cloth made by the Asante and Ewe people of Ghana and Togo. Tcloth is hand-woven into 4 to 8 inch strips that are subsequently cut into smaller pieces and sewn together to form a single cloth with a unique geometrical pattern. Color and design convey specific meanings. Anatsui uses a similar process. However, the fragments that constitute his work are the flattened tops of recycled liquor bottles created by Nigerian distilleries. So here's an example of Tcloth. In Asante legend, Anansi the spider taught the people to weave his cloth in return for a few favors. And here we see the king of the Asante dressed in Tcloth and, I assume, sitting on the golden stool. Something that I find intriguing about this work is that it appears differently depending on how it's hung, so the museum curators actually play a role in creating the work of art. I also find the use of recycled materials intriguing. Where else have we seen this? Well, here's Zhu Bing's background story, which isn't a required work, but you saw, and Michael Tuffrey's Pisupu Lua Afe, which is a required work. I'm going to let the artist do most of the talking here. In this brief clip, Anatsui talks about why he uses liquor caps in his work. Old Man's Cloth is also a work where the medium is very important. Let's watch another video clip, this time about the artist's studio process. Before I move to our last work, hooray, let me share some commentary on Anatsui's work from the style section of the New York Times. Quote, Anatsui is Ghanaian, and the intricate narrow-banded composition of Anatsui's first cloths are recognizable variations of kente cloth, the emblematic fabric of Ghana. The work's Africanness is specific and emphatic, but also complicated. A rich tradition is honored in poor materials, and those materials, the flattened bottle caps, with their legible brand names, suggest other connections as well to global consumerism and more obliquely to slavery's economics, of which liquor was a key part. In summary, his works are an elegant emulsion of history and craft, post-minimal form and pop recycling. The article goes on to talk about how Anatsui's works appear in museums. Anatsui insists that his hangings be draped rather than hung flat, but he doesn't insist on draping them himself, and in fact, he is perfectly happy to have galleries or museums do so. He has preferences. Horizontal ripples are better than vertical ripples, but he doesn't regard any particular arrangement as final. Naturally, professional curators are disconcerted by this freedom. Anatsui has little patience with their scruples. Here's a quote from him. Museum people are trained not to be creative, Anatsui complains. I find that very frustrating. I realize I've quoted a lot of reviews in this unit, but I'm going to do it again. This comes from an art critic writing in the Raleigh-Durham Indie Week magazine, and this is this author's explanation of Stadia 1, 2, and 3. It's a triptych composed of 3 staggeringly complex and engulfing works. These huge canvases explode with stylized renderings of stadium architecture and overlays of international emblems, flags, and corporate logos. The piece pulses with color in a brilliant antagonism, a massive diagram that lays bare the conquest of ideological and corporate brand loyalty on a global scale. Here the sports metaphor is milked for every possible association: war, power, competition, advertising, fascism, fanaticism, pageantry, media, and so on. Of course, this slide can't begin to capture the scale of these works. They are enormous, but at least here you see all 3 parts of the triptych. One of this artist's best-known works is a giant, we're talking 80 by 23 foot mural that she made for the entry lobby of the financial firm of Goldman Sachs in New York City. When asked about whether she felt hesitant about creating work for one of the great movers and shakers of global capitalism, Merudu responded, I don't see it as an evil institution, but as part of the larger system we all participate in. And anyway, for me it was about making something. It was about the art. I just add, it was profitable art. Goldman Sachs paid $5 million for the work. So let's watch, if I can make my slide advance. Let's watch a short clip that shows her painting and installing the mural and talking about how her work should affect the viewer both when seen from a distance and close up. Julie Moreto's father is a professor of cultural geography, and a fascination with maps, architectural drawings, and the proliferation of cultural symbols permeates her work, as this mural makes a little clearer than Stadia 2 does. So here's another comment from the same reviewer I'd quoted earlier. Moreto's influence on his daughter shines through her work in its manifold themes of global migration, societal upheaval, shifting economies, and manifestations of corporate, political, and military power seen through the organizing principle of mapping systems. By the way, do you remember what other artist was influenced by her scientist father? Rachel Reusch's father was a renowned botanist. Okay, it's not really over until you take the exam, but let's stop for a moment to celebrate crossing one finish line. Then, on to the final event.